Man, I'm realizing that I've never had an RPG horror story from Discord. So, here's a player's response to being separated from the game. Apologies. It seems I overestimated your ability to DM. It's funny how our judgments can take such a 180, isn't it? Well, I regret that my experience with D&D has started with a group like this, but you never know. I guess you live and learn. Maybe I can use this to help me avoid such toxic experiences in the future. I guess I can take this as an opportunity to be fully transparent. Kyrus is a terrible DM. The session was disjointed, nonsensical, and poorly made. I was legitimately surprised when I found everyone else praising him. Neither he nor the campaign he made deserved such. His ridiculous stories about his ancestors and past experiences are mostly complete and utter nonsense. You are a lowly, asinine, idiotic fool. I struggle to believe that I ever actually helped you. But I guess we can't help the phases that come over us. Well, goodbye. I hope you experience the worst life has for all of eternity. I'm almost happy you lost your job. Why do people act like this? It just baffles the mind. Hello everyone, new-ish DM here with a story about that guy in my group. I'm still playing with him, so if you think of any advice you have for dealing with him in the future, please share it below so that I can continue to grow as a DM and hopefully resolve this without it becoming an even bigger horror story. Our story starts when one of the players in my group, we'll call her the Sorcerer, informs me that she has a friend, we'll call him the Tiefling, who is not having a good time in his current campaign and is curious about joining our group. At the time, I was so thrilled that my players had been having such a good time in my game that they were recommending me to their pals that I said the Tiefling could play before I even talked to the guy. A few days later, the Tiefling and I hop onto voice call to discuss his character and figure out how we'd fit him into the campaign. The call went well enough, but we never actually got around to talking about the campaign, setting, or even how he'd fit in with the other PCs. Instead, we wound up having a 3-hour conversation which consisted of little more than the Tiefling telling me about how cool his OCs were and what a great player he was. Eventually, I ran out of time to talk and had to end the call without getting to discuss any of the stuff I'd hoped to get to cover. Look, this is no biggie. He was probably just excited to be out of his old group. Things would hopefully start to run smoother once he got settled in. That did not turn out to be the case. Right from the get-go, the Tiefling only seemed to be concerned about what his character was doing and making sure that everyone knew how cool his OC was. The Tiefling was the only player who called his characters OC, and seemed to consider them to exist on their own even outside of the game, like they were characters in a book he would eventually write someday. This also included inserting himself into scenes that he wasn't really a part of, so he could describe how his character stood quietly against the wall, watching everything that was going on. His behavior did technically make him a very strong RPer, as he was always ready to describe what his character was doing in great detail, but it also meant he was doing about 40% of the talking in any given session. The Tiefling also seemed to have this odd tendency of trying to connect his OCs to the Sorcerer's character. At one point, he went to her in character and tried to convince her to leave the rest of the party with him since she had no good reason to be with them. Note that at this point, the Tiefling's character had been with the party for about half a day in-game, whereas the Sorcerer's character had been going on adventures with them for a few months at the very least. I understand that the Tiefling knew the Sorcerer the best out of game and was new to the rest of the group, but his behavior was so centered around her characters that I was occasionally worried it was indicative of a larger problem. Now comes the suspected cheating bit. It's worth noting we play over Discord without a dice bot, so I have no way of actually checking the player's rolls. If you know of a good one, please share. The Tiefling always seemed to be really good with their rolls. I don't think he's crit failed a single time since he joined, and I know for a fact he's gotten a nat 20 or 2, definitely more in the campaign. For the mathematicians in the crowd, I'm pretty sure the following incident will prove especially painful. The party were attending a festival and decided to partake in the horse racing event. Now, the tiefling's character at the time was a cavalier fighter, and he must have decided that he had to win that race because he proceeded to do really, really well. The actual race mechanics were simple. Each lap, there were 6, you make a 1 animal handling check, 2 a con saving throw, or 3 both at disadvantage, combining the results. With the exception of 2 laps, the tiefling chose the third option, 2 checks at disadvantage. This means he had a total of 10 checks, 8 of which were at disadvantage, without adding modifiers. All 10 of his checks were 16s or above, with 2 crit successes. 16 or above, 8 times in a row at disadvantage. I even had a disguised Nilbog in the crowd who was using magic to cheat, hopefully winning and setting him up as a fun little adversary, who was making all of his checks with advantage. The cheating Nilbog at advantage only managed to roll better than the tiefling at disadvantage once in the entire race. The other big time that I am almost certain he cheated was when I had him make a roll that would negatively affect him. For reference, I sometimes ask my players to roll dice for me so that they know I don't want to secretly screw them over. On one such occasion, I needed to know how many of the high challenge rating guards would be looking for the PCs on a stealth section and asked if someone would mind rolling a d4. The tiefling immediately volunteered and declared that he had rolled a 1. I called BS on that and decided myself that I had actually meant 1d4 plus 2 and gave them 3 guards to hide from. It would end up being quite fun, and the tiefling's character even got to make an intimidation check to frighten away said guards by the end of it, beating the encounter. There were more small instances, but those are the 2 big ones I can recall. Finally, we come to the most recent upset, and what prompted me to post here in the first place. I was browsing DM's Guild looking for a high-level module to round out our campaign with when I encountered an awesome, and I mean absolutely epic Feywild adventure. Now, our group was already busy with a different adventure at the time, and would be too high level at the end of it to play through this one, but I was excited enough by the module that I decided to run it along with the current adventure, swapping between stories each week. It would be a nice change of pace from the more grittier tone of the other adventure and give the PCs some really unique roleplay opportunities. The other players were immediately on board with the idea and began brainstorming new characters for the adventure. The tiefling was not so enthused and told me, as part of a much longer rant, that it would take too much focus off of his OC in the main campaign if we started playing this separate adventure. I relented, saying that I and the other players needed a change of pace and had no intention of stopping their current adventure. The tiefling retorted that he hated the Feywild, of course he does, and would only be able to play half the time since he just couldn't be expected to play outside of his comfort zone. I didn't really know what to tell him and just apologized for the inconvenience. We were already playing once a week, so even if he never joined the Feywild adventure, he would still be playing bi-weekly. That, of course, changed when, 2 days later, the sorcerer posted a picture of her new changeling PC in preparation for the Fey adventure. Suddenly, the tiefling was very interested in participating with the rest of the group, readying his new OC in no time flat. I should note that the sorcerer was the only girl in our party. Oh, good God. Now, the tiefling had been talking about playing a druid summoner for a long while and decided that this was the perfect opportunity. Awesome! One of my favorite PCs I ever played was a druid summoner. The tiefling didn't know that, but at this point I had nothing against the concept. The tiefling makes a character and I let him know that I'm going to compile a list of the available animals to summon by region ahead of time so that he can be familiar with them before burning a spell slot. The tiefling resists. Don't worry about it, that's just more work for you. I'll just pick them myself. I tell him that it's really no problem, and I'm actually very excited to use this as an opportunity to get flavor for the different areas of the adventure. The tiefling still resists. The spell just says the DM has the stats, it doesn't say they get to pick. I tell him that it's heavily implied that DM picks the spells himself and cites a couple sources that confirm the application of the spell and even point to the Feywild Adventure player handout, which included a couple homebrew creatures and thus mentioned what happens when druids summon them, which also confirms that the GM usually chooses the creatures summoned, but the player can make requests. The tiefling escalates this into a full-scale fit and tells me that if I don't let him summon whatever he wants, then I'm ruining his strategy and destroying the only reason he wants to play summoner in the first place. I apologize and tell him that I don't know what to say here. I'm going to be very busy with work for a bit, but if he gives me a few days, I'll have the lists finished so he can look over them and make an informed decision. The tiefling curses at me a couple times and repeats again that if any summoning restrictions are placed, that would ruin the game for him before going quiet a few hours. Later, he DMs me and says that he can't stand it and is going to make a new OC. I'm not sure if there's something else I should have done here, or if there's anything I can change in the future. I really want the tiefling to have a good time here, and he hasn't caused an issue for any of the other players. I swear I have an amazing set of players. How many groups have a rules lawyer who's actually helpful and provides constructive feedback? So if there's any advice that could manage him until at least the end of the campaign, that would be superb. In terms of recommendations for the DM, I side with most of the comments. Talk to the players, and then if you reach a consensus, boot him. From what I understand, there are some predetermined friendships, some things that exist before the game, and that makes that kind of thing a little bit complicated. Some of the players might want him to stay until the end, but bring up this incident, because cursing out your friend and DM is not nice, especially over something like Dungeons and Dragons encounter balance. Getting that upset over that sort of thing is really immature and a huge red flag of a toxic friend. Also, his creepy following of the sorcerer is kind of iffy. I would be careful around that sort of thing. Bring up this stuff with the other players and make it clear that your position is a negative one. This is not a good thing for you. A toxic player in your game will ruin the experience for you and possibly for the other players in the future. Now finally, let's discuss OC syndrome, or getting too connected with your PC. I mentioned before that I think it's awesome when players get connected to their PCs, when DMs get connected to their PCs, and even NPCs. But don't get so connected that you value the NPC or the PC more than the overall plot. I think that is really, really bad. Having this propensity for main character syndrome, or this is also, in my opinion, will lead to DMPC syndrome, those sort of things are really, really bad. Don't allow that to happen. Be connected with your character, care about your character, but make sure to care about everyone else's character as well. I think that is the most important difference. This guy clearly just cares about his character and the sorcerer's character for maybe out of game reasons, if you know what I mean. I really think that's all there is to say about that. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more episodes of this series as well as my other content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.